Caveman Yu-Gi-Oh! Just the phrase alone is not only jarring to many, but is truly divisive in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community. Some see it as the epitome of unskilled and dumbed-down Yu-Gi-Oh!, where skill expression is at its lowest and the better player doesn't often win, while others like myself absolutely love the concept, as there's actually something quite beautiful about throwing out all the complicated and convoluted strategies or combo lines that duelists try to memorize from spreadsheets. I'm more in favor of a mano-a-mano bare-knuckled fist fight where the last standing duelist wins. Is Caveman Yu-Gi-Oh! The flashiest or most elegant thing to watch? No, of course not. But it does do one specific and incredibly interesting thing that many overlook. It makes attack points matter. That in itself is one aspect of the game state that I really enjoy and find captivating. In this video, I'll be covering one of the TCG's forgotten but impressive anti-meta titans of old. You'll learn how and why this deck worked, its main competitive rivals, and its noteworthy accomplishments. We're going off the deep end for this video and talking about Malefics of all things, so if you don't know, prepare for a doozy. But before we get into the video, if you enjoy learning about Yu-Gi-Oh! History or just like my videos in general, then help the channel grow by giving the video a thumbs up so it gets recommended to more viewers like you. Also by sharing the video with your friends on social media, commenting your thoughts below, which I do read, and subscribing if you have not already so that you don't miss the weekly uploads. You can also keep up to date with everything G by following me on Twitter at MegaCapitalG. Let's head back to 2011. This was the last year of the 5Ds era, and the end of 5Ds was drastically different than the beginning. You say 5Ds and players have a tendency to immediately think of the likes of Teledad, Synchro Cat, Infernity, and other decks that moved at a lightning pace. But as the ban list took its toll on those strategies over the years, we were left with formats that tended to be fairly slower than others from earlier in the era. The Malefic archetype premiered in the Yu-Gi-Oh! 3D Bonds Beyond Time movie. It was played by the main antagonist Paradox and had a very interesting design. Much like Pegasus's Toon theme cards from Magic Ruler, each Malefic monster was a corrupted version of an existing card. While the new Malefics didn't copy the abilities of the original monsters, they did exactly that when it came to the offensive output, which is actually what it seems this archetype is all about. Brute force, raw power, and enough strength to beat your opponent forcibly into submission. The archetype was tied down with a bunch of off-putting heavy restrictions, such as only being able to control one Malefic monster, and that monster being the only card that could attack for its controlling player. Malefics, just like Toons, were also created with built-in self-destruct buttons that would have them destroy themselves if a field spell was not face-up. Despite one of their early key cards, Malefic Stardust Dragon, having an effect specifically designed to safeguard against that. Just like with Toons, Duelists saw this as a condition that was essentially a deal breaker when it came to using them for competitive play. After all, their own field spell, Malefic World, wasn't anything special. It basically allowed you to skip your draw phase in exchange for a Malefic monster search, which could be great if you needed a monster, but also kind of useless if you already had one. Most deem Malefics too high risk with not enough return. This led to the archetype receiving a very mild reception upon their initial release around February 2011 from the competitive side of the community. The archetype did one thing and pretty much one thing only: big monster beatdown. Without a doubt, the highlight of Malefics were the massive attack values of their very easy to summon cards. A solid 2500 attack on Malefic Stardust and a ridiculous 4000 on Malefic Cyber-Inn, which to this day is still very impressive. These cards hit like trucks, and summoning them simply required you to banish an extra deck monster of the same name that you were probably never going to use in the first place. This was the element that actually lured in a few bold duelists, players who were enticed by the idea of getting to summon a 4K beater for just a single card. The question would be, could these players find ways to work around the many inherent competitive hurdles? This question was answered just a couple of months after release, oddly enough by a small-time duelist in Colorado named Brian. At the Colorado Springs Regional, held on the second weekend in April, Brian played a Malefic virus control deck and ended with a top 4 finish. While his deck was wisely built, This entire thing began and ended with one card.
In Morphing Jar, I just feel like I need to get to the skill drain. This is the most important part of the deck.
I believe it.
3 skill drain. Yeah. The main part here is the skill drains. I mean, it's just so good in this format.
Skill drain. Yes, I know many will scoff at the idea of skill drain being played in a skillful way. After all, I'm pretty sure that sentence alone is an oxymoron. But that's honestly the truth. By playing and centering his entire strategy around this specific powerhouse, Brian effectively cracked the code on the Malefic archetype. First, skill drain erased 2 of the biggest hindrances immediately for Malefics. The self-destruction effects, as well as the attack limiting ones, would both be nullified under the presence of the powerful trap card. This meant more potential offense, less reliance on Malefic World, and lowered vulnerability with absolutely no downside. Brian's monsters and overall offensive strategy would be completely unaffected by the card. Actually, let me correct that. With the inclusion of Fusier Dragon, Brian actually had one card that would greatly benefit from Skill Drain, as its attack on the field would double. It goes without saying, but Skill Drain didn't just have benefits for Brian's deck. It was also one of, if not the single most powerful Floodgate card of the March 2011 metagame, alongside Necro Valley and the Limited Royal Oppression. On the March 2011 ban list, Konami moved Skill Drain from semi-limited to unlimited, and Malefics were perfectly tailored to take advantage of this. Gadgets, Gravekeepers, Tengu plant decks could all be completely shut down by this single card. So make your monster stronger and crush the meta at the same time? Now that's a win-win. Brian also packed this deck with a pair of deadly virus cards, Deck Devastation and Eradicator Epidemic. Deck Devi was incredible versus Gravekeepers, Gadgets, and Tengu Synchro, while Eradicator could be a complete blowout against back row heavy decks or combo ones that use lots of spells. He used loads of targets for both cards, and I'll even note that without Skill Drain, Fusier could still be tributed if set for either card. He added speed with Reckless Greed and Morphing Jar in a full-on attempt to get to those skill drains as early as possible at all cost, and even went for the bold choice of Swords of Revealing Light as a stall tactic to stabilize the game state if he was in a bind. Brian's deck was interesting, successful, and unique, but most important of all, it laid out the blueprint for success for others to follow. At first, Duelists tried to implement Malefics into the Gravekeeper deck. It made sense on the surface level, as Malefic Stardust Dragon's protection effect was fantastic for keeping Necro Valley safe, and Gravekeeper's biggest Achilles heel was always offense, which of course Malefic specialized in. At YCS Orlando in May, we saw 2 Duelists see successful tournament runs en route to top 32 finishes. Tommy Murillo actually took it one step further with a full-on Gravekeeper Malefic hybrid that, in all honesty, kind of looks like he just slammed both decks together. It may have worked short term, but adding too many monsters into Gravekeeper builds always ran the risk of reducing one of the most powerful cards in the strategy, that of course being Royal Tribute. That's why for the most part, Duelists dropped this theory, and moving forward, they basically reverse engineered it. If I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times in these videos. At major Indianapolis events, be they Shonen Jumps or YCS, strange and unpredictable stuff often happens. At this tournament, 2 completely unconnected duelists ironically entered with the same idea in mind: destroy every opponent put in front of me with my Malefic Skill Drain deck. Meet Conrad Selig and Luis Zambrana, both of which were about to upset the apple cart with their never-seen-before Malefic decks. Both duelists had the same basic idea of smashing their opponent's face in with giant 2500 attack plus monsters and slowing down the meta with Skill Drain, but oddly enough, their decks were fairly different. First up was Luis, who started off the day with an impressive 6-0 record. That caught the attention of head writer Jason Gerbermeyer, who gave him a feature match. He was pitted against Tech Genis, and it was a real back and forth slugfest, where unfortunately his deck's anti-meta specialties couldn't really shine. Necro Valley and Skill Drain were great anti-meta cards, just not in this specific matchup, which By the way, was a huge struggle, and he narrowly won to move on to a 7-0 record. Gerbermeyer was intrigued and decided to give Luis a deck profile on the spot to show the community his innovative build. Luis tailored his build of Malefics to be as constricting and stun-like as possible, a full playset of the meta-smashing Thunder King Ryo in the main deck. He also doubled down on his commitment to Necro Valley by maining a pair of Royal Tributes for those possible early game blowouts. These new and far better versions of Malefics ditched the old Malefic world for Gear Town and Necro Valley to fulfill the field spell condition while also giving them some utility. Necro Valley was excellent against synchro strategies, and Gear Town would allow the deck the ability to summon the massive Ancient Gear Gadgetron Dragon who could avoid common battle traps like Mirror Force and Dimensional Prison. Luis also played multiple copies of a card that, honestly, many weren't prepared for: Safe Zone. Safe Zone was a legitimate game stealer when equipped to a 3000 attack plus monster, as that monster could no longer be targeted, destroyed by card effects, or battled by the opponent. For 2011 standards, this was mind-blowing, especially in a format that, for the most part, was completely devoid of mass spell and trap removal because of the banning of Heavy Storm on the previous ban list. A safe zone meant no D-Prison, no Mirror Force, no Torrential, Book of Moon, Evac device was going to take out that monster, and in the event that your opponent found the Mystical Space Typhoon to deal with it, they would usually hold on to Dark Bribe specifically for that scenario. This was also a time where Yu-Gi-Oh! Had very little non-targeting monster removal, so there weren't that many outs. In the event that you were able to access something like Trishula, Dragon of the Ice Barrier, well, there's a good chance that they would have already had skill drain on the field to make that card useless. On the other side was Conrad Selig, who built his Malefic deck around reliability, speed, and, well, I guess, more speed. Conrad focused a lot less on stun and pumped this deck with draw cards, triple Upstart Goblin, and a full playset of trade-in to get the gears moving. He had 8 trade-in targets, and in a deck packed with this many huge attack monsters, the 1000 life points from Upstart rarely mattered. He also decided on 3 copies of Terraforming, which was basically unheard of at the time. He clearly wanted to be able to deck them at will. I believe his focus on speed is why he also decided to run single copies of power cards such as Safe Zone, Dark Bribe, and Sing Zen Hue. Usually, you wanted to play these cards in multiples for consistency, but they weren't actually cards you ever wanted to see in multiples. Draw deep enough into your deck and you were bound to get to them was clearly his mentality. Another solid choice for this deck was a pair of Forbidden Lances. Lance actually was useful in multiples, as it could be used right away and didn't need to be set on the field first. Lance could help dodge those pesky traps and was also great in the damage step as well. Conrad had a much more aggressive build and playstyle that Duelists clearly were not prepared for. I say this because Conrad completely swept Day 1 Swiss and was the sole undefeated player going into the top cut portion of the tournament. He was later given a feature match in the top 16 versus his local friend and well-respected duelist Grant Kelly. Kelly made it to the quarterfinals of the 2010 US Championship, but in this matchup, he was completely outmatched by Conrad's aggression. In this duel, Grant was heavily punished for his quick use of spell and trap removal. In game 1, he uses set MST during his second turn to destroy an activated skill drain in order to resolve Akaya's the Shadow Monarch. He won that battle but lost the war, as he largely had no answer to Conrad's safe zone protected Stardust a few turns later. Game 2 brought much of the same with even less resistance, as he used Dust Tornado to destroy Necro Valley in Conrad's first end phase, only to lose out to the same safe zone when he attempted a smashing ground on Gadgeton Dragon. This duel was a 2-0 blowout for Conrad as he advanced to the quarterfinals. As fate would have it, Luis Zambrano would also reach the quarterfinals while grinding through the opposite side of the bracket. Both duelists would unfortunately fall during this round, but were applauded for not only making it that far with Malefics, but for trying to carve out their own paths in the metagame. Moving forward, the deck would fall out on the YCS level in favor of Zexal archetypes like Windups and Insectors, but still saw success on the regional level. And hey, it was definitely fun while it lasted. And with that, we are at the conclusion of this Yu-Gi-Oh story. If you enjoyed the video, or more importantly, you learned something, please give the video a thumbs up to help recommend it to more viewers like you. Comment your thoughts below, subscribe for more weekly videos if you haven't already, and maybe check out the other stories that are on your screen right now. Also, follow me on Twitter at MegaCapitalG. Thanks for watching.